Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for spending the end of your busy day with me. We're excited to have you all here today. There will be moments that I may ask you to dump some things in the chat or to unmute, but I'm just glad to see you all. And today we're just going to talk about, this is a part of our Educator Wellness series. And the big thing is we want to talk about how do we nourish wellness and how do we begin to engage in collective care. And so just as a start to remind you all, this is a part of the Thriving Minds PD series that focuses on comprehensive school mental health. That's a part of an initiative through the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Rennie Center, MASMHC, and BRYT. And so we're a consortium of people and a group of people that have come together to really think about what is necessary for us to begin to build comprehensive school mental health systems. And a piece of that is educator wellness. I don't think we can build a system if we don't think about the people within the system, right? Not just the kids, but the adults. And so today we're going to focus on the adults. And so before we get started, just want to let everyone know all the slides will be shared at the end of the presentation. Please try to stay muted during the presentation. Throw questions that you may have in the chat. I'll do my best to get with them. One of the things I tell people is remember, when you use the chat, everybody sees it, unless you remember to send it directly to a person. So make sure that whatever you're putting in the chat, the comments are relevant for everyone. Also, if there's anything, questions or thoughts that you have that don't get addressed, please, we're happy to answer them. Email any of us and we will get back with you. So thank you all for this. So I want to start off with where we are right now, right? And so one of the things, I found this cartoon from the New York Times. I started laughing and I was like, look, kids that grew up with the Hunger Games and different things are like, oh, I read about this. I know everything that's happening right now. This makes complete sense to me. And for those of us that didn't, we're sitting back like, this don't make sense. I'm tired. This is not what I signed up for. And we're actually, and not leaning into it, right? And so one of the reasons I bring that up is because I really want to say that I often, at the beginning of the sessions that I give, and you all, if you've been to any of them, you've heard me say this over and over again. I really believe that COVID-19 is a slow-moving collective trauma for all of us, right? That it's causing us to try to figure out ways to cope that we never thought we would have to deal with, or we never thought we would have to come to, right? And so for a lot of people, this way of thinking, of trying to figure out how to cope with this, we just don't know. And it's new and we need help. And so trying to figure that out. And I tell anyone, we don't know what the short or the long-term consequences will be of this. I was talking with a friend of mine, an educator, and we were talking about kids and had this realization. And she's like, my second graders are acting like kindergartners because they haven't had the socialization, right? That general stuff. She's like, they don't know how to be still. And I was like, they hadn't had to be still for almost 2 years. They've been doing what they want. Yeah, they don't know how to be still. And they're like, she's like, oh. I said, you're dealing with kindergartners with big behaviors, right? And we really don't know what the short or the long-term consequences of this is going to be. And so one of the things is really important, I tell anyone, is that we have moments in the midst of this experience that's unpredictable, unknown, unwanted many times, and seems to be constantly fluctuating and transitioning, is we have to take moments and take stocks of where are we, right? And we even have to acknowledge where are the people we're working with, right? And recognizing that some people, they might be thriving and they might be feeling excellent. And there's some people that haven't slept well since before the pandemic, and it's only gotten worse, right? And sleep is not coming easily. And so some people are in crisis mode, some people are struggling, some people are surviving. And these are the behaviors we're seeing, right? This is what's coming up, even for adults. When you'd be like, I didn't say anything that was harsh. And somebody's like, that was mean. It's just, we're heightened, we're on alert. And so what does that mean for us? So we just want to take stock of where we are. And so I want you all to take a minute. And so this is a moment of reflection. And I want you all to just think about, where are you? If I had to ask you, where are you? Where's your battery? Where are you right now? And then I want you to think about where are your kids? And then I want you to think about where are your colleagues, right? And so recognizing that what we say all the time in trauma-informed care is where you are in your brain and your body tells us how we can interact with you. And so if we're in a struggling and surviving place, it's really hard to access those upper portions of our brain that cause the reason and reflect. And it's really hard to be in relationship with anybody when I'm like, I'm struggling, I'm at the core. And so how are we intentional and think about for those people who are at the core, how do we engage in collective care and offer ways that we can actually be present for each other? And the reason that's important is because Bing Crosby in the movie Country Girl had this quote, and it said, just about anybody can face a crisis. It's that everyday living that comes after it that's really rough. And so a lot of times it's the everyday living and figuring out how to deal with it that's really hard for all of us and for us to hold on to. And so in this session, we're going to talk about how do we deal with the everyday, right? And how do we deal with the everyday when we're continuing to live with uncertainty, right? And crisis. And so in the beginning, we're all excited. We were making adjustments. We were extending lots of grace. We believed we could adapt to this. We were excited about the opportunities, thinking about what did it mean to work from home? What did it mean to do something different? And then we get to the middle of it and we're like, oh my God, when are we going back to what happened before? That felt a little bit better than this. Then we begin to grieve losses. There's increased anxiety. There's more self-focus. And you know what? In the middle of it, the ability to adapt, you're like, I can't adapt no more. Please don't throw any more change at me. Every time you get something and telling you, use this new technology, do this, that's when the frustration, and it's almost like, I can't hear you because I'm completely disengaged at this point, right? And as we live with it longer, the prolonged exposure to this uncertainty, there's this hopelessness about the future, right? And you no longer see opportunity. You're tired. It's hard to see anything when you're tired. There's increased mental and physical exhaustion again. And you can't respond to change positively. It's hard. It requires sometimes more of you than you feel like you have to give. And where before we were like, let's adapt, you're like, no, 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 no. I need this routine to stay the same. And we get reduced to it. We're very rigid because we're like, I can't take on anything else because of how we've been impacted by the prolonged exposure to uncertainty and crisis. One of the things, the capacity that Brene Brown and a couple of other people have talked about is this idea of reaching surge capacity, right? And when we talk about surge capacity, it's actually saying surge is just like sudden, like a swelling. And you all know capacity is when, look, I'm at my max, I'm done, right? And surge capacity is a term that's really used in healthcare, right? And it's used because it's like, look, in order to meet an unexpected need, we really have to surge our ability to do. So we put everything in. It's a sudden movement to respond to something that isn't supposed to be prolonged demand. It's just sudden, right? And so one of the things that we have talked about is the reason we're saying surge capacity is how we've responded initially to COVID and how people have been continually having to figure out ways to cope. And that surge, it was fine in the beginning, but having to keep going with it and not knowing when it's going to end, and then hearing about more and more that you have to do to try to be in this environment, right? It creates mental and physical exhaustion because we weren't meant to be at surge capacity for long stretches of time. That's supposed to be a temporary thing. Think about when there's a surge in the National Guard, they're bringing them in. That is a temporary thing. They're not permanent troops that are supposed to be there. And that's the same way when we go into surge capacity because of the way life has affected us. So one of the things that I just want to show you all is some quotes that have been posted various places online that talk about what it means to be at capacity and to be maxed out, right? And someone says, and I just wonder, you're not lazy, unmotivated, or stuck. You've been living in survival mode. You are just exhausted, right? The other thing someone said, look, self-care shouldn't be about how do I make myself able to be more productive. It just should be a reminder that you are more than productive, right? It should be, I tell anyone at this point, we're actually talking about self-repair. We're not even talking about self-care. Can we have a moment to repair our brains, our bodies, our hearts, right? It's about how can I repair myself because this has taken a lot out of me, right? And then looking at this, one educator said, look, I feel like I'm a flight attendant flying a plane that's going into a hurricane. And I'm trying to act like everything's normal as we fly into the hurricane. And someone else said, look, we've just started entering the winter. What's gonna happen? We all know from October to December is not just the winter season. It's also the winter when we think about mental health, right? And the reason I'm saying that is in that season, that's when the sun, people aren't getting enough sun. The opportunities to engage get decreased. People hunker down. And so we really see a rise in mental health concerns during the winter. And so how do we begin to acknowledge that and admit it and say, look, what happens next? How do we repair ourselves, right? So I'm not going to put you all in groups, but I want you all to take a minute. And I just want everyone to think about, and I want you to place in chats, how have you been affected by living at surge capacity for the last 20 months? Just place in the chat, how have you been affected, right? Because this has affected all of us. How have you been affected? I tell anyone, I used to be the master of multitasking. Don't ask me to do more than one thing at a time now. I can't. I tell you other thing, I'm seeing decision fatigue. People like, make a choice. Do you want to do this? And you're like, I've had to make so many choices. I don't want to make any more right now. And so what does it mean when you continually like being at surge capacity? That's what it is. It's just being maxed out, right? And having to be at that for so long, it costs us something. I tell anyone, adults matter too. We can't just focus on kids. You know, we all know, I say kids do well if they can. Well, adults do well if they can too. And we have to acknowledge that sometimes adults need to actually tap into a network and systems for themselves too. A dysregulated adult will struggle to regulate a dysregulated kid. And this is from Bruce Perry. He screams it. He's like, look, you can't expect an adult that is struggling to regulate themselves to really, I'm trying to keep myself calm, right? So how am I going to be able to help a dysregulated kid? You know, right? And so, because I'm not as patient as I was, right? I'm not as optimistic as I was. You know, one of the things that's really hard, I tell anyone is, I was sitting with a friend of mine and she's like, I used to be a teacher of the year. I don't know what I am now. I said, you're still that person. She's like, no, that person's gone, Courtney. She's like, I don't even know how she said, I had a rhythm, I had a routine. She's like, I have nothing now. And I said, you know what? It's okay because you can show up and be different in every season. And I'm not going to invalidate how hard this is for you right now and how different this is for you right now. And she said, thank you. Right? And so all of us are being called on to be different than we ever thought. And so you all might be saying, what can we do? You're like, Courtney, this is great. I hear you. But what can we do to help ease these feelings of being maxed out, right? You know, and so we're going to talk about what those things are we can do. And I'm going to say those are nourishing wellness. We can complete the stress response cycle. A lot of times our bodies and minds get stuck in the stress response cycle. We can think about, how do we have balanced mind nutrition? You know, we go to the doctor and they tell us you need to eat better. We know about food nutrition, right? But how many of us think about how do we have better mind nutrition, right? And how can we prioritize what matters the most, right? Do we even give ourselves time to think about what matters the most? And then when we do that, are we willing to implement good boundaries? right? So those are some things that we can do to help. And so we're going to explore them a little more. And the first thing I want to say and I want to emphasize is that healing ourselves is in the return, right? And healing doesn't mean that we return to a place where everything's perfect, where it felt great. It doesn't mean that. Healing simply means that we adapt to ability to respond to what's imperfect. And we stop spending so much time doing that we allow ourselves opportunities to just be present, where we let go of judgment, we let go of comparison, and we let go of fixed ideas. That's what happens when we ask you all to take a mindfulness moment. We're simply saying, take a moment where you're not judging yourself or someone or the environment. Take a moment you're not comparing, and take a moment you're not judging. That's a mindful moment, right? And a lot of times, those are the things that rob us of our ability to heal ourselves because we're doing that. We can't fully embrace the moment. And so we're going to talk about healing, and that healing is in the return. So the first thing I'm going to show you all, and I've shown these before, is that there are two different cycles that we can find ourselves on. And we can find ourselves going through a burnout cycle and embracing a burnout culture, or we can find ourselves saying, you know what, I'm going to embrace some wellness, right? Burnout, we work harder, we ignore our needs, right? We get numb, robotic. You all mentioned that in the chat. Like, we withdraw, our coping strategies aren't there. We're depression, exhausted. We're overwhelmed. Our capacity, we're at surge capacity, right? Where wellness is our opportunity, extending ourselves compassion. We're saying, I am good enough. And we're telling other people, you are good enough. We're saying, you are enough. You got this. You are doing the best you can. We're recognizing that our best can look different from day to day. We begin to prioritize rest and joy. So someone placed in the chat, like, I can't wait to get home and to sit in the silence. That's prioritizing that rest and joy. We're intentional about assessing and reflecting about what we need in the moment, right? We invest in our health. You know, it says we're solution focused. Solution focused simply means I no longer go through where I'm just responding to what's happening to me. Something happens, I just respond. Something happens, I just respond. So we decide I'm going to be intentional about what I allow during my day. What are 2 or 3 things that I want to do during my day for me and not for everybody else, right? And thinking about how do we usher in this wellness culture versus continuing to be on the burnout cycle. I tell anyone, as you look at these, pick 2 or 3 that you would say, you know what, I'm going to try. I might be too far on this burnout culture, Courtney, but I'm going to find 15 minutes to do something in my day that brings me wellness, right? Because eventually our bodies begin to tell us what's happening because it wears down when we're in the burnout cycle. And so I show you these because we want to begin to usher everything I'm getting ready to talk to you about is about how to usher in a wellness culture and even wellness practices for you. Because I tell anyone, when you can do it, your very essence of being forces those around you to also begin to embrace it. So how do we do it for ourselves first? So again, the first thing we're going to talk about is how to shift from this burnout cycle again. And so one of the ways you can do it is really paying attention to your stress response cycle, right? And so really thinking about, you know, how am I managing the stress throughout the day, right? Because stress it can kill you, right? Unless you do something. If you let the stress just sit with you, it can kill you. But how do you allow yourself to actually go through the entire process? And this is something that Brené Brown talks about very often. And so you all might be asking, what is the stress response cycle, right? And how do we begin to really think about it? So the stress response cycle is simply, you know, when your brain is having strong emotions and it's happening in your it's happening in your nervous system, and it has to have a beginning and an end. We don't want to get stuck in an emotion. We want to have something trigger it. We want to go through the process, but we want to have an end. Remember, everything needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And understanding you that your emotions are also neurological events. And so one of the ways that we're going to talk about how not to get exhausted is exhaustion is struggling to find a way to even, I don't know how many of you, when someone's like, let's talk about this, and you're like, I don't even know how to talk about this. I'm struggling to even find a way to articulate what I'm experiencing and what I'm happening, right? And it's really hard. We get stuck with emotions. I had a friend of mine, she's like, I'm pregnant and I'm afraid to tell anybody because I'm not excited about it. And I was like, well, you're stressing yourself out. Let go. You know, because social norms would be like, oh, if this event happens, you have to be excited. No, it's okay for you to say, I'm uncertain. This scares me. I have some fear. I don't know what I just opened up my life to. That's fine too. Right? And recognizing that sometimes when we're stuck in those emotions, we need others to help us through. We need the connection. And it's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. And so the three components of burnout are emotional exhaustion, and that's fatigue. Like we talked about, carrying too much for too long. I'm tired, right? And depersonalization comes from, I can't care anymore. I don't know, you reach a point that's just like, I just can't care about this anymore. You know, I laugh because my mom will reach a point and she'll be like, look, y'all, the house is dirt, it's just dirty. I'm taking a nap. I can't deal with this anymore. We'll figure out what's going to happen with the house later, right? That's that depersonalization sense, right? And then also, it's burnout is that sense of, I ain't been able to accomplish nothing, right? Feeling that nothing you do makes a difference. So emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a decreased sense of accomplishment. When you're experiencing those, you are burned out. And there are steps that we can begin to take to complete the stress cycle. I don't know about you all, I might be dating myself, but what you see coming up here is just an iPod, and it says it's disabled, try again in 1,956 minutes, right? And so this was just a reminder, like, oh, we can disengage, try again. And sometimes we need to do that for ourselves and for people in our lives. We need to say, you can try, they're gonna have to try again later, right? Because you don't have anything else left to give, right? And so ways to complete the stress cycle, number one, physical activity, right? And it doesn't have to be anything hard. You can put your favorite song on and dance it out, run, walk, swim, just lie on the floor and just think about what is happening through my body. Breathing is a number one way to regulate your nervous system, right? Take the key thing I tell anyone when you're breathing, sometimes take longer exhales than inhales, because then you are allowing your system to slow down with the exhale. Positive interactions with friends, that completes the stress cycle. I don't know how many of y'all can have had a really rough day, but then that one positive interaction, even with a colleague on the way out of the door, changes the day, right? Or that one moment where you have a positive interaction with someone in a store, right? That can really begin to, that completes our stress cycle. It really begins to take you to that place of hope, right? Other ways to complete this stress cycle, affection. Someone genuinely giving you a 20-second hug tells your body you're safe, right? And affection can lower our blood pressure. It can change hormones. It can release chemicals within our bodies that say, I don't have to fight, flight, or freeze anymore. I'm okay. Affection is important. I tell anyone, creativity releases positive effects. Because when you're leaning into and you're cooking and you're knitting and you're painting and you're doing that creative thing, you have to have hope that you can create something good. Even if everywhere else feels hopeless, you can't lean into that painting or that knitting and not believe that you're going to create something that you'll like. Otherwise, you won't be able to do it. And so just doing something creative for 15 or 20 minutes a day, coloring, that creativity ushers in positive effects in your life that then allows you to complete the stress cycle. The other thing that completes the stress cycle, believe it or not, is just crying it out and recognizing it's okay to cry. And sometimes just having a good cry moment. The situation will then resolve itself. I know we allow kids to do it. I've allowed some of those in my life to just sit there. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna let you cry this out, and then we're gonna come back to it. But sometimes we don't allow ourselves to do that. But crying is definitely a way to complete the stress cycle. Another way is just having a good laugh, you know, just finding something to laugh about. I remember we used to share memes and different things with people. And you know what? That laughter, it releases your nervous system, you know, and it completes the stress cycle. So how are we helping each other laugh? I know we can talk about experiences and we can cry together, but can we also laugh together? Is something to consider.
Hey, so as some of you guys might know, I'm a music teacher, and I found that one of the best ways that I can process the whole transition to online learning and teaching is to write a song. So I wrote a song. I'd like to share that with you guys now. Here we go.
So that was her song. And I hope that some of you all laughed today. Because laughter is what allows us to complete the stress cycle. The other thing that's really important is that we have to also think about how are we feeding our brains? So what kind of food are we giving our brain, right? And so when I think about a healthy brain platter, I want you all to take a look at this. It's just a platter that says, look, we begin to find balance between downtime, focus time, playtime, reflecting time, connecting time, physical time, and sleep time. One of the things that I want everyone to remember about balance is that balance doesn't mean I'm doing everything in sync or at the same level all the time. It doesn't mean that. It means that there might be moments where something is higher than the other, but I'm working that over time, it balances itself out, right? And understanding why that's important. It's me thinking about and being intentional about how am I trying to attune to my brain. I have people that are like, you know what? I'm gonna take this platter and I'm gonna plan my day and see, do I allow myself time for this in my day? And if I don't, why don't I? Or where are there areas that I need to increase, right? And so when we think about nutrients of the mind, and I'm bringing up all the times that we said, so it's focus time, right? Are we allowing ourselves a time to be intentional, right? And what does that mean to be intentional, right? Are we even where we're focused on something that brings us joy, a goal for us, not everyone else, but focus time for us? Have we allowed our times to have play? You know, and play as adults can look different. Sometimes I tell you what, I enjoy going outside kicking the ball. Sometimes it takes my mind off of things, right? Or playtime for adults can even be just enjoying a novel. You know, playtime can be, you know, are doing a sip and social with friends, going for a walk with somebody, right? Are we allowing time for connecting, right? And that connecting can be with people, it can be with animals, it could be with nature, it can even be connecting with yourself. But are we allowing time for connection? And if not, why, right? The other thing, are we allowing time to move our bodies? Our bodies need movement to flow. And it doesn't mean we have to get on and do something strenuous every time. It could simply mean, am I doing My dad just says, you know what? I get up in the morning and I do 5 stretching activities. That's his thing. But he can bend over greater than me because he's been doing it for so long. I'm struggling with flexibility. He's like, oh, I do my five stretches every morning. And it has made a difference over time because he's been consistent. That's his physical time and he's consistent about it, right? The other thing, do we make time for the quiet time in, right? Time in means time internally focused. Am I thinking about myself? Am I quieting myself, right? That I can focus on sensations and images and feelings and thoughts. We'll go throughout the day and we won't even think about how did what happened to my day made me feel, right? And is there downtime? Do you have time that's not planned and structured, that's not giving away, that you're not trying to accomplish a task or goal, where you can simply sit and let your mind wander? For some of us, that best time might be early in the morning where we can sit down with a cup of coffee or a drink of tea and just look out the window and just listen to the wind in the air when the house hasn't gotten too busy. Those are moments that allow our brains to recharge, or in the evening when the house is quiet, right? And downtime, I remember my mom used to force downtime sometimes. She would turn off all the lights and tell all of us to be quiet. So, how do we even help others believe in downtime? And then the bigger thing is, how do we get to a place that we think about sleep? You know, our body, if we don't sleep, our body can't rejuvenate itself, right? It doesn't repair itself. So, sleep time is important. And are we giving ourselves enough of this? These are our nutrients of the mind, right? So, I want you all to take a moment, and we are going to put you all in groups in a minute, but I want you all to take a moment. And first, I want you to think about which mind nutrients do you have in abundance? What do you have an abundance of in this chart, right? And think about what activities or patterns help you access them. And then I want you to think about what mind nutrients are you lacking? And what are some things that you could do to access them both during and outside of work hours? So I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment. And I'm going to actually put you all in breakout rooms. And I want you to talk about how in your groups, I want you all to talk about how are you feeding your mind? And what's one key area that you could do to feed your mind right now? And be intentional about it. All right.
Courtney, do you want me to close up the breakout rooms?
We can give them about 2 more minutes. Oh,
Okay.
they're coming back, I think. Maybe. Yep, let's go ahead and close them, Ellie.
Okay. Cool. They're coming back in a few seconds.
No problem. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. All right. We just about have everyone back. So one of the things, as you all are coming back, that I'll just be interesting to learn. Welcome back, everyone. One of the things that it would be interesting to hear, if somebody wants to, what are some ideas that you all came up with for feeding your brain? I want to know, what are some ideas? How are we going to be intentional? Was there any area that everybody saw consistently like, yeah, this is an area we all need to work on? I'm just curious to hear what happened in some of the groups. So just feel free to unmute, just talk. I want to know. Inquiring minds.
Someone mentioned staying hydrated, and for me, that's a huge problem. Just remembering to fill your water bottle, drink your water bottle, and not go home with a headache every day, because that is really tricky, especially wearing a mask all day. You don't remember to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Someone in our group mentioned that they exercise with friends so that they get the connection being with other people and also get the physical activity in. And I thought that that was a great idea.
That is true. I know some people that are doing that with friends virtually too. They all do a yoga class together virtually. So yes, other things that came up.
Start every staff meeting with some check-in connections time, really on a personal level. Let people share how they're doing and just connect as human beings before they connect just strictly as professionals.
Brian, one of the things that we did with one of the schools I was working with was we actually started doing kudos at the start of every staff meeting. So having a kudos jar and then reading out the kudos at the start of staff meeting, where people could give kudos to their colleagues for how they felt supported throughout. That's one thing that that we've done. Others, what else for the brain platters? How else? Are you all allowing yourselves downtime? I'm not seeing no heads go yes. Do you all turn the alerts off on your phones? You all can do that. So over Christmas break, everybody's gonna turn the alerts off. I'm seeing heads. They're like, yes, yes. Okay, okay. So we're not staying super late at work anymore. We're all going home. We're not working into the wee hours of the night. We got clear separation. Tracy's like, yep, we're good over here. Okay. Well, y'all are doing good. Anything else anyone wants to share that you think your colleagues may benefit from?
I want to share that if you are teaching or you have children or grandchildren, that one of the things I know for me is that play. So going and doing that play with them and just being in the moment with that play really does really helpful, and adding those moments to your of play into your lesson planning if you're a teacher or a counselor, and allowing for that, but then setting aside that kind of I'm in charge of it and just enjoying it.
Yes, yes. All right, well, we're gonna keep going. So the next thing that I'm gonna share with you all is we're going to talk about how do we begin to prioritize what matters the most, right? And what does it mean when we say we're prioritizing what matters the most, right? And so one of the things that I just want to read this quote to you. It says, at the core of productivity is the feeling that you are doing the work that matters to you the most at the moment you most want to do it, without having to make huge sacrifices along the way, right? That's what it means to prioritize what matters. It's not just doing what matters the most, it's doing it at the moment you want and without having to make huge sacrifices to do it, right? And so have we sat down and talk about what matters the most, right? And so I'll share with you all, I have a 16-year-old niece, and I don't know how many of your schools do this thing where the adults act like the kids. And so she's captain of the dance team. So in the spring of the year, she selected her auntie to be her. So that means I have to really work on this exercise thing, because as we know, 16-year-olds and how they talk about adults can be brutal. And she has explained to me that I need to lose my tummy because I have to lead the dance team. And so I'm trying to figure out what that means. It might mean I'm 5 minutes of core exercises a day, right? And allowing myself to have moments of reflection and laughter with her about, am I allowing that time to really think more deeply about, are the choices I'm making, like eating my chocolate chip cookies, really helping me get to the goal that I have of being able to, as she says, be the fly auntie in the spring of the year that she wants to have representing her. And I told her she's gonna get the best body that she can get in the moment, and that's what we're gonna be happy about. But I am gonna do some stuff to make some changes, but I think being present for her matters more to me than anything else. And so how are we even making room for what matters the most to us? And so Justin, it just jumped on me. Okay, here we go. So just want to do this. This is an opportunity. Are we allowing ourselves, one of you all says, is building routines in our lives that make us think about what we're doing. How are we prioritizing the most? That could simply be a check-in with a friend of someone. We tell them our dreams and they ask us, how are we working on them, right? It could be journaling. One of the things that could be gratitude practice. One thing that's really important is when people are experiencing a lot of hopelessness and a lot of downness, is when you start your day to say, think about 3 things I'm looking forward to start my day, right? Just doing that can shift your outlook for your day. What are 3 things that I'm looking forward to during the day? And then ending the day with, okay, before I go to sleep, I'm gonna write out what are 3 things that went well. Those shift what we focus on grows, and just having those practices can change what grows in us, right? And then we talked about that repetitive movement, walking, swimming, running. I even tell people sometimes just tapping, are we allowing ourselves to have reflection that allows us to reflect on work when we're leaving work, on our way to work, right? And do we allow ourselves in the moment? Again, this goes back to, can we live intentional and responsive, not intentional or responsive and reacting? How can we make it a and versus an either or? So I want you all to think about, these are just some questions that you can use to do an assessing and reflecting. And you want to do it without judgment. Assessing and reflecting is the moment that you allow yourself to check in about, how is this routine, this pattern, this activity, this thing, how is it working for me, right? And so the way you do that is you say, you know what? Is this still working for me? If not, why am I still doing it? Why am I still going in this direction? What do I need now? What do I want to cultivate right now? What do I need to cultivate? One of the things in this time period is acknowledging the need and for moderation, right? And if I need to cultivate moderation, then it's okay for me to say, I'm only getting 10 papers graded today and I'll do 10 more tomorrow. But there's also a need for me to take a break, right? And so assessing and reflecting is a moment for us to maintain the integrity with ourselves, right? One of the things that I heard that I want to share with you all on a talk is this idea that hope is a discipline, right? And most of us say, well, what does that mean? And it's that hope is a discipline, right? And so it's not that we're trying to get to a particular outcome. Hope is a discipline, and hope is believing, constantly reminding ourselves that things can change, that an outcome or anything can change. And they said, that's hope. It's that you just believe that things can change, and they can change in a direction that feels good for you, right? And so one of the things is, how do we encourage and foster the discipline of hope, right? How are we reminding ourselves on the everyday basis that things don't have to stay the same, that they can continue to change? How do we remind others of that? How do we say life is tough really right now, and you're doing an amazing job trying to get through it? I'm sure that if you keep going, it will change. I'm going to hope with you that if you keep going and you keep putting in right now, that things will change, right? And that we can extend. And how are we helping extend grace, right? Simply saying your best is good enough today. You know, ease, everything doesn't have to be hard, and connection, right? So this is the idea that hope is a discipline of believing that things can change, right? And I've shared this story as an example. My mom was a 35-year educator. And we were in the store, and there was a gentleman that knocked me over trying to get to her. And then he looked at me and he says, "You have an amazing mom. She's my hope." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, she's amazing and she's my hope." And he told this story how when he was in kindergarten, he showed up and he came from a family that very few people could read. And so it was assumed that he wasn't going to be able to read either. And he said, so when he came and he ended up in my mother's class, he says he didn't know. Sorry, he said, I knew nothing. And I wasn't trying to know nothing. And I had nobody at home helping me to know anything. He said, but your mom never gave up on me. He said she continued to, even though I would throw the words aside and not play it, she didn't stop believing that I could. And she said she used to always tell me, I really believe that when you put your mind to it and you focus on it, that you'll be able to do it. And he said he became the first person in his family to be able to read out of kindergarten because of my mom. And so he says, I carried that with me throughout my life. Anytime things got hard, I always remembered that Miss Tucker told me that if I put my mind to it, eventually I was going to figure it out. She told me I can do hard things. So just that connection from a kindergarten teacher carried him through the rest of his life. And so how are we helping others? How are we even telling that to our colleagues, right? And so remembering that hope is a discipline. The other thing that we talked about is boundaries. This is the last thing I'm going to cover with you all, is boundaries and how important boundaries are, right? Boundaries are the way in which we say, hey, I love me, I respect me, I'm going to spend time with me, right? And the reason that's important is because I tell anyone, boundaries is almost like your personal integrity. Because if you don't have boundaries, you don't know where you end and where someone or something else begins. You don't know where your personal life, your professional life, where your creative life, you don't know where any of that begins or ends if you don't have boundaries. So boundaries help you maintain a sense of self that allows you the opportunities and allows you to acknowledge what's good for you and what's not, right? And so you don't allow everything in because you've decided I'm going to have boundaries because it's important for me for my long-term health that boundaries exist. Boundaries are important for me because it allows me to tap into that what's important to me and knowing my priorities. So boundaries allow you to maintain integrity with yourself and integrity with others, right? We all recognize that there are barriers to boundaries, right? it's fear that people, an abandonment of what will happen. Because anytime you change the flow and the flow and direction of something, you're gonna get resistance, right? And so there's gonna be some fear presence. There will be the thoughts of abandonment. There's gonna be confrontation, because people don't want you to set boundaries with them because they're getting exactly what they need from you. Wait, you're gonna give me a boundary? No, I don't want it, right? And then there's the guilt and shame that we have about boundaries, because sometimes setting boundaries means that we might not meet some expectations that we've set for ourselves or others. And how do we begin to think about creating empowered expectations that empower us versus shame us? And then we all have to be honest. Healthy boundaries are rarely taught, modeled, or expected. It's almost like it's abnormal to have good boundaries, right? So how do we tap into that and also recognize that sometimes we don't establish boundaries because you're like, Courtney, I could lose my job. I could lose my life, right? Like, so there are a lot of different barriers to boundaries, and some of them are very real. So we want to just share some 4 strategies, 4 steps for setting boundaries. It's just acknowledge and identifying what your limits are. I think a lot of times we don't acknowledge how tired we are and what we can do. We just lean in and say, I should be doing this. I should be doing this. But if you're tired, it's okay to say, I can't do this right now. I'm tired, right? The other thing is paying attention to your feelings. If there's discomfort, resentment, and guilt there, that's cues that you might not be setting the right boundary, right? And the other thing is give yourself permission to set the boundary. Try it. Don't tell yourself no before you try it, right? And then also consider your environment. Think about what in my environment is going to help me, be able to implement and keep this boundary. If your boundary is, I'm not going to check my emails, then that's turn off all alerts on the phones and I'm not checking my email during breaks, right? So think about how your environment can foster your boundary setting. A friend of mine says her phone automatically has an alert to go on nighttime setting at 10 o'clock. So she isn't getting calls, she's not getting nothing. So if she's up doing things for her, not responding to other people, right? So also think about and consider how your environment is helping you set boundaries. So we're gonna walk through a boundary activity, and I just want you all to do it in your minds and in your hearts, and you may choose to write it down. So the first thing I want you all to do is I just want you to think about a person, a group of people, a job, or activity with whom you struggle to set boundaries. And this could mean that they're too rigid, that you keep the person at too much of a distance. You're too porous, that means it's too open. Or there could be some other problem that isn't easily languaged. So I just want you to think about who or what or whom do you struggle to set healthy boundaries with? I want you to hold on to that. The next thing I want you to do is that boundaries can actually be thought about in 5 different categories. We can think about them physically, we can think about them mentally, we can think about them emotionally, we can think about them materially, and we can think about them across time. So with this who or what or whom that you thought about from the previous side, I want you to think about how are your physical boundaries, your mental boundaries, your emotional boundaries, and your material boundaries and your time boundaries, right? How are they with this who, whom, or what? I want you to really think about where are they in each of these categories. And then I want you to do me a favor. We're gonna sit quietly for about 60 seconds. I just want you to close your eyes. And I want you to think about what would your life be like if you had healthy boundaries with your who, what, or whom? What would your life be like if you had healthy boundaries? How would your time be spent? What would you open up yourself to be able to do? where would you go? Would it bring laughter? Would it bring joy? Would it bring silence? Would it bring relief? Would it usher in creativity? What would life be like? How would it be different? So now I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And I'm going to place you all in groups again. And this time, I want you all to just talk about boundaries. And where do you think you would place it? What's a good boundary you could think about over the next 21 days? And if you were able to implement it, how would it make you feel? So I want you to talk about what could be that boundary and how would it make you feel? All right, welcome back, everyone. Good to see you all. What are anyone want to throw in the chat or unmute? What are some boundaries you all came up with?
I think a lot of no email on the weekends.
No emails on the weekend. That's hard. Any other ones?
Creating a personal happy hour for yourself, whatever that means.
Yes, a personal happy hour to do the things that make you happy. Yes, love that. Others.
This is the second year I've been in the position that I'm at. So it's my first year at the school because last year was Zoom teaching. And I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself to design the best program ever. And it's exhausting. So I need to roll and set some boundaries and say, you know what? A is as good as B.
Yes.
Just different.
Agreed. Anyone else? What else did y'all come up with? I'm just wondering if anybody, what happens when Rosie, go ahead.
Well, I wasn't going to say it, but I thought, like, when I imagined setting the boundary was going to be all peaches and cream, but for me, I was immediately met with grief. Like, what I'm avoiding by not setting the boundary is feeling grief over what I'm thinking is what's holding the relationship together. So it was like, whoa. And how sometimes overextending is a way to avoid that bad feeling.
Yeah. Right. And sometimes not having boundaries keeps us from having to deal with stuff that we're like, oh, I never really wanted to deal with that. Right. And it's better for me to do that. I think you bring up the other point is, what do we do when others don't want to respect those boundaries, right? When other people are like, no, your boundary doesn't make me get what I want. It doesn't make me feel how I want. And I tell anyone, I said, that's the point where you have to say, well, we have to find a different way of coexisting, because I'm putting up this boundary because it's not working well for both of us. And don't you want this to be a mutually beneficial relationship versus one that's parasitic? Because right now that's what it's feeling like. You're getting all the benefit from this and I'm not getting anything. And so really being able to have that conversation about what it means to have interactions that are mutually beneficial, that don't feel like they drain you, right? So that's really important when you have those conversations. And it reminds me, and I'm going to share my screen, of this poem by Bruce Perry that talks about our connections. And he says, fire can warm or consume, water can quench or drown, wind can caress or cut, and so it is with human relationships. We can both create and destroy, nurture and terrorize, traumatize and heal each other. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. And that includes how we say, I love you to ourselves. And that's from Dr. Bruce Perry. So one of the things that the key takeaway from the sessions that I want everyone to just hold on to is, what's a new habit or something that stood out? What's one small thing that you can commit to over the next 21 days that will help you usher in your own culture of wellness, right? That you will be able to nourish personal wellness, right, for yourself. What is the one small thing that you can do? And I want y'all to throw those in the chat. And as I share with you all, as I said at the beginning, Thriving Minds is a consortium of like-minded groups that really want to see comprehensive mental health systems in schools that supports kids, administrators, faculty, staff, teachers, everyone, because we realize that we're all a part of creating a school environment where everyone feels safe and held and seen and heard. And I just want to end it by telling you all, thank you for all the work that you do. Here's our contact information. We really appreciate you allowing us this opportunity. I'm going to give you all 15 minutes back, but here's what you all have to agree to do. Don't check email. Take the 15 minutes and move your body. Do something, check in with yourself, do some assessing and reflecting. Send a friend something to laugh about, but drink more water. Do things. Take this time to do something for you, not to immediately jump into doing something again, right? This is a part of how I offer this time for you all. It's already here. Use it. Nourish the wellness for you. Go for a walk, go to the restroom, move your body, and go with it. So thank you all. If you have any questions, we're here. And really think about what's going to be your thing that you're going to do, your small change over the next 21 days. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.
You all are welcome.